Ming Dynasty Empress powerless, paralyzed by fear, and poisoned by ritual. You're an empress. You live in the Forbidden City. You wear silk robes embroidered with gold thread and dragons. You have servants attending to your every need. You sit beside the most powerful man in China, the emperor himself. You should have everything, right? Except you have nothing. No power. No freedom, no safety. You're a prisoner in a golden cage, paralyzed by fear, and slowly being poisoned by the very rituals supposed to honor you. Welcome to life as a Ming Dynasty Empress. It's not what you think. How you became Empress: you didn't marry the Emperor because he loved you. You didn't even meet him before your wedding day. You were selected. The selection process for Empresses and Imperial consorts was brutal and dehumanizing. Officials examined thousands of young girls from noble families across China. They checked your height, your skin, your teeth, your hair, the sound of your voice, the way you walked. They looked for physical perfection and any sign of defects that would disqualify you. If you made it through the initial screenings, you moved to the next round where they examined you even more intimately. They checked every part of your body for birthmarks, scars, anything that might be considered inauspicious. You were poked and prodded like livestock being evaluated at market. You were maybe 14 or 15 years old, torn from your family, brought to the Forbidden City, and told you were now the property of the Emperor. You had no choice in any of these. Your family couldn't refuse the honor without risking execution for insulting the throne. Your wedding was an elaborate state ceremony where you were dressed in layers of heavy ritual clothing, your face painted white, barely able to move or breathe. You met your husband for the first time during the ceremony. He was probably decades older than you, surrounded by hundreds of other women who were also his wives and consorts. And then you learned the rules of your new life. Rules that would govern every moment of every day until you died. The Forbidden City was your prison. The Forbidden City sounds romantic. This massive palace complex is in the heart of Beijing, home to emperors for centuries. Beautiful architecture, stunning gardens, priceless treasures everywhere. But for you, it was a prison you could never leave. As Empress, you lived in designated quarters in the inner court. You couldn't go anywhere without permission and an entourage of eunuchs and servants. You couldn't leave the Forbidden City, ever. You would spend the rest of your life within these walls, never seeing the outside world again. Your days were completely structured by ritual and protocol. You woke at specific times. You dressed in specific clothing chosen for you. You ate specific foods prepared in specific ways. You attended specific ceremonies at specific times. Every single moment was prescribed. You had hundreds of servants, but you couldn't trust any of them. They reported everything you did to the emperor's officials. Your conversations were monitored. Your actions were scrutinized. Any deviation from proper behavior would be reported and could result in punishment or loss of favor. You had no real power. The title Empress sounds powerful, but you had almost no actual authority. You couldn't make political decisions. You couldn't issue commands outside your own household. You couldn't even choose your own servants or ladies in waiting. Everything required approval from the emperor or his officials. Your main purpose was to produce a male heir. That's it. That's what you were for. If you gave birth to sons, especially the firstborn son who would become crown prince, your status improved. If you only had daughters or no children at all, you were a failure. The pressure to conceive was immense. Every month when your period came, everyone knew you'd failed again. The emperor might visit you less. Other consorts who'd produced sons would gain favor. Your position became more precarious, and you were competing with hundreds of other women for the emperor's attention. He had one empress, multiple consorts of various ranks, and countless concubines. All of them trying to get pregnant. All of them trying to secure their positions by producing sons. The rituals were poisoning you. Here's something most people don't know. Many of the beauty rituals and medicines that empresses and noble women used were slowly killing them. The white face makeup that was considered essential for beauty, it contained lead. You applied it daily. Lead poisoning causes neurological damage, organ failure, and death. But everyone used it because pale skin was considered beautiful. The medicines you took to enhance fertility or maintain youth often contained mercury, arsenic, and other toxic substances. Traditional Chinese medicine at the imperial court sometimes used dangerous ingredients. Doctors would prescribe them, and you had to take them because refusing would be seen as rejecting the emperor's concern for your health. You were expected to maintain perfect beauty and grace at all times. This meant tight clothing that restricted breathing. Elaborate hairstyles are so heavy they gave you headaches. Shoes so small and delicate you could barely walk. Your feet might have been bound as a child, a practice that broke bones and left you in chronic pain, barely able to stand. The food you ate was tested for poison by tasters, but it was often cold by the time it reached you because of all the protocol around serving the Empress. You ate alone, in silence, following strict rules about how many bites of each dish you could take. You were slowly being destroyed by the very things supposed to honor your position. Living in constant fear, the Forbidden City was a place of endless political intrigue, and you were right in the middle of it, whether you wanted to be or not. Other consorts saw you as competition. If your son became emperor, you'd become Empress Dowager with real power. They wanted their sons to inherit. This made you a target. Poisoning was common. Not obvious, immediate poisoning that would be investigated. Slow poisoning over months or years that looked like natural illness. You couldn't trust the food, the medicine, even the cosmetics. Any of it could be tampered with. Eunuchs ran the inner court, and they had their own agendas. They'd spy for different factions, carry messages, facilitate secret meetings. They had access to everything and everyone. Some were loyal. Many were for sale to whoever paid them. If you had children, you lived in terror for their safety. Imperial princes were sometimes murdered by rivals. Princesses were married off to distant nobles, and you'd never see them again. You couldn't protect them. You could barely protect yourself, and the emperor himself was unpredictable. If he decided you'd done something wrong, real or imagined, he could have you punished, demoted, or executed. Your father and family could be punished too. One wrong word, one perceived disrespect, and everything could be taken away. You lived in constant fear, never knowing who to trust, always watching your back, always waiting for something terrible to happen. When the emperor died, if you were lucky enough to have a son who became emperor, your position improved dramatically. You'd become Empress Dowager and finally have real power and influence. If you didn't have sons, or your sons didn't inherit, you faced a different fate. Sometimes empresses and consorts who hadn't produced heirs were expected to commit suicide when the emperor died, to serve him in the afterlife. This practice varied by dynasty and emperor, but the threat was always there. More commonly, you'd be moved to a separate palace where you'd live out the rest of your life in isolation. Forgotten, no longer important, just another widow waiting to die. You'd spend decades in the Forbidden City, following every rule, enduring every ritual, living in constant fear, and you'd end up alone in a corner of the palace complex, discarded like furniture that was no longer needed. The Golden Cage. Being a Ming Dynasty empress meant having a prestigious title with no real power. It meant being surrounded by luxury while being a prisoner. It meant being honored in public while being poisoned by ritual in private. You were selected based on your appearance, married to a stranger, locked in the Forbidden City, and expected to produce heirs while competing with hundreds of other women. You followed endless protocols, applied toxic makeup, took dangerous medicines, and lived in constant fear of assassination or falling out of favor. The Empress was supposed to be the most fortunate woman in China. In reality, she was one of the most trapped, most endangered, and most powerless. Your body was decorated with poison, your mind was paralyzed with fear, and your life was spent in a beautiful prison you could never escape. That was life as a Ming Dynasty empress.